Morning all.
Morning, Chair.
Have we started recording? There, thanks. Morning all. Welcome to the Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee 2 meeting, Thursday the 15th of July at 9:30 a.m. via Teams, which is due to government advice to the public to practice social distancing, and it will be held virtually with committee members and officers accessing the meeting from remote locations. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed subsequently. Please can everyone ensure that all mobile phones are switched off or to silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda on Friday the 9th of July 2021. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their cameras on at that point. But I'd ask that, with the exception of myself as chairperson, at all other times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference and to ensure the connection remains as stable as possible. Please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Officers from Scrutiny will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and when necessary will mute those not being used. If any members wish to speak, to raise a point or question, they should please click on the raise hand button at the top of the Teams window and I will come to you in turn. Please do not use the instant messaging chat to enter questions or comments. I will now ask the Scrutiny Officer to announce the names of the councillors in attendance at this meeting.
Thank you, Chair. The members of Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee 2 in attendance at this time are Councillor Sean Aspey, Councillor Mike Clark, Councillor Jane Gebby, Councillor Martin Jones, Councillor Mike Kern, Councillor Janice Lewis, Councillor Anel Pachella, Councillor Gary Thomas, Councillor Ken Watts, Councillor David White, and yourself, Chair, Councillor Amanda Williams.
Great, thank you. So if we go to agenda item number 1, have we got any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies for absence from Councillors Pam Davis, Phil White and Caroline Webster.
Great, thanks very much. And item number 2, have we got any declarations of interest? Councillor Burnett.
Can't get my camera on. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I have to declare an interest, a personal interest, as I am a co-parent of a child who's just entered the transition process.
Great, thanks very much. And Councillor Patel.
I just wanted to give the leader's apologies. He's away on other council business. I don't know if he was invited, but I understand that that's what he would like us to tell you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Right, no other declarations of interest. Okay, if we go into item number 3, approval of minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of April 2021. Can I have a mover and a seconder for those, please? Ooh. Is there anyone to second it? No, I wasn't at this meeting.
Yes, I will.
Yeah,
yes,
okay, great. I don't know who was present because it was before my time on this committee. Great, okay, if they've been moved and seconded, we can move on. So item number 4, and that's the strategic programme for people in Bridgend, improving outcomes for the Joneses. So is it Claire, are you presenting this?
Yes, I am, Chair, and I've got a presentation to run through, if that's all right with committee. Are you happy for me to try and display my screen to do that?
Great, thanks.
There we are. Can everybody see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Thank you. Good. Let me try and put it onto slideshow as well. There we are. So thanks very much for the opportunity to present the resetting of the Social Services and Wellbeing Strategic Programme to Scrutiny this morning. I'm here this morning with Laura Kinsey, who's Head of Children's Services in Bridgend, and Jackie Davis, who's Head of Adult Services in Bridgend, and Andrew Thomas, who's our Group Manager for Wellbeing. I'm going to run through the presentation just for continuity in terms of in terms of the speaking voice, but all of us will be happy to take questions and talk about what we're going to present over the next 10-15 minutes. So what we're going to set out for Scrutiny this morning is just our vision, and then a brief update on the ways that we're working currently in COVID because of a request for a committee around that. We are going to then present what's proposed and what's set out within the paper around our future strategic programme, and then very happy to take questions as we move through. So in terms of our vision, before I came into Bridgend, and I've been here now since October last year, the thing which I knew about Bridgend and really resonated with me was that Bridgend social services were very person-centred in everything that was done, and Mrs Jones was at the centre, particularly of integrated services in the adult world. What we thought as we reflected how we moved forward, and we'd had 2 strategic boards which had been chaired by my predecessor Sue Cooper prior to the COVID pandemic, a remodelling adult services and a remodelling children's services board, was that it was very important that when people thought about Bridgend, they thought not just about Mrs Jones, who is very, very important to us, but tends to be thought of really as an older person, perhaps getting a little bit more frail as she does age, but think about all the Joneses, so young people, people of working age, older people with all sorts of challenges, but all sorts of abilities as well. And that what we look to do is to be person-centred for everybody that we work with, and that our vision is to do what matters for all the Joneses, and that we would look to do that through keeping people well connected and addressing health inequalities. And that's never been more important as we move through the COVID challenges, because we know COVID, as many diseases, has been a condition which has particularly affected people who experience other health and other inequalities. That we're committed to seamless locality-based wellbeing, primary, community health and social care for all population groups. And that sounds a little bit jargonistic, but what it means is that we're committed to removing the barriers between services, that again, in that person-centred way, we want to work together. We want to work in our communities in which we live, rather than requiring people to go into more institutional settings such as hospitals and care homes if we can avoid that. That we want to organise all of our services around primary and community clusters, so that, you know, the people working across different services within our county borough get to know each other, have those really strong relationships, can pick up the phone, are often co-located with each other, and that we understand and mitigate risks to people's safety and their safeguarding and independence and well-being, and that we do that in a positive way. We understand risks, but that means that we work with people to manage and mitigate those risks. So as I mentioned, we're just going to briefly update on the operating models that we're working to currently. So obviously, in terms of COVID tiers of restriction, the last year has challenged us at all levels really, and at times we've been operating at tier 4. We are now sort of firmly, I think from yesterday's announcements, in tier 1 and moving towards tier 0. So in terms of our children's social care services, throughout the pandemic, our staff have continued to provide information, advice and assistance from the multi-agency safeguarding hub based in Ravenscourt. The multi-agency staff have, in reduced capacity, been physically located there throughout the pandemic, and that's been really important in terms of that multi-agency working. Case management teams have now started in a phased way and in a very risk-assessed way to return to office accommodation and our hubs, and that's really important because of the nature of social work. That peer support and timely face-to-face supervision really supports the best possible practice. Visits are carried out face-to-face, risk assessed as appropriate, and using appropriate risk mitigation such as PPE for child protection, care and support, and for our care experienced children and our foster carers. Contacts for our care experienced children mainly face-to-face unless there's a risk identified that it shouldn't be. We've got now a blended approach to meetings, child protection conferences, core groups and reviews, and one of the things we'll be looking at as we move forward in terms of lower tiers is whether we have more face-to-face, because particularly for some families who'll be part of those meetings, that might give them a better experience. And our respite services for disabled children are resuming in Baker's Way. In terms of adult services, similarly, staff continue to provide throughout the pandemic information, advice and assistance service for the common access point. Our case management teams very similarly are starting to return in a phased way into office accommodation, again, all risk assessed through the corporate accommodation group, and strong input from health and safety, and face-to-face contacts with individuals are resuming and have been risk assessed. Our referrals continue, and we've continued to process referrals throughout. Our day services and respite services are now reopening, still with reduced occupancy due to the need to socially distance, and use of PPE and other risk mitigation such as ventilation, which we now know a lot more about than we did earlier on in the pandemic. Our in-house and commissioned care homes are accepting admissions, and visiting is happening into those settings in subject to the Welsh Government guidance. Home care continues as business as usual and has been the absolute foundation of keeping people safe, well, and as connected as possible during the pandemic. An information sharing protocol has been created for health and social care providers to access and contribute to. So that's how we're operating at the moment, and that operating model and our strategic programme going forward is based on a number of principles for how we support all the Joneses, who hopefully are all out now in their parachutes. And those principles are that however we need to work between ourselves and with partners, for the individual, there should be no wrong door into our services. Support, information, advice should be timely. We should promote continuity, so reducing the number of handoffs. We really need to focus and continue to focus on prevention and preventing escalation of need, and some of our preventative services need to be very targeted at those points in people's lives when there is a risk that needs will escalate, and we're focused on working in a strength-based way in terms of understanding what people can do, what resources they've got in their own lives, what resources we have in our own lives, and how we can support people to understand their own resources as well as commissioned services where necessary. So this is just another slide. I think I'll just skip on from this one because it talks a little bit more about how we're working across partnerships in terms of that seamless wellbeing, health and care. And this starts to get us now into the business of the outcomes programme. You must forgive my grammar because I've struggled with how to, and my name before I married was Jones, how to do Joneses. I think it should be Joneses, but these are the principles for the strategic programme for the Joneses. And they're really, really important to us, and hopefully to the people that we're working with. So all of the elements of the programme need to strongly reflect the voice of the people that we're working with. That nothing about me without me, and increasingly driven by. And equally our workforce. There's no point in any of us at a senior level sitting in ivory towers and designing ways of doing things which are disconnected from the reality on the ground. So ensuring that at a strategic level we have those arrangements in place for having the workforce driving what we do, and their voice very strongly represented is critically important. And then what we're trying to do as well is to be as disciplined as we possibly can about programme and project methodology, because we all know that things can drift, can't they, if we have scope drift. So that's how we're trying to deliver the programme. And this is then the programme itself. So you can see that it's part of the overall council transformation programme. I feel very strongly in the discussions I've been having with the corporate management board colleagues is not just a social services and wellbeing programme. This is a whole council and indeed partnership approach around improving outcomes for people, because to do what matters for people, so many of the solutions lie outside of what we do in social services and wellbeing. So many of those solutions lie within communities themselves, lie within housing or education and family support, or in health services. So it's certainly not within our gift, and we have that partnership approach right across. We're very connected into our public service board, the regional partnership board, which is has an increasing increasing role in terms of regional planning and resource allocation, and then working with our colleagues in the Health Board, that yellow box there, and the yellow priority we've got is how we integrate services further with Bridgend Integrated Locality, which is part of the Cymtath Morganic Health Board management structures. But the 5 areas of work for us are around community resourcefulness, which is really building on all the work that we've already done around community resilience and well-being, strength-based practice and outcome-focused practice, which is the core of really good social services and social care. Continue to have strategy, commissioning and service development, and remodel what we do, our workforce, and then that integrated work with the locality. So just to move on, and what we've got for each one of these priorities then is a slide which sets out the full range of what sits beneath those programmes. So the resourceful communities, the resourceful resilient communities, we're increasingly changing that language to resourceful rather than resilient, because it is about the resources which are in communities and which we need to continue to develop. There are a significant number of priority pieces of work we're taking forward here, either ourselves or in partnership, and that those colour codes there on that slide linked to the colour codes on the previous slide. So you can see all those yellow ones are pieces of work which are integrated with the Health Board. The Early Intervention and Prevention Strategy for Children and Young People, which I think is going to be coming into scrutiny for consideration in September as an early help and safeguarding strategy, is something which is a very joint piece of work with colleagues in education and family support. There's work for an emotional health and wellbeing strategy for adults, and an equivalent piece for children and young people as well. And critically, there's some very long-term pieces of work here, such as our leisure and cultural strategies right through for the next 15 years, 14 years in 2021, because we need to be looking at what we need from both an asset and a service provision beyond the lifetime of current contracts and partnership arrangements that we have in place. This slide here sets out a framework for community resourcefulness and all those things that we need to have in place. There's a lot of buzzwords in here, but I think at its heart, it's about supporting communities and supporting individuals within communities to support themselves, but understanding in a community development sense where gaps are and working to fill those gaps. But through filling those gaps, hopefully putting in place sets of arrangements which are resilient and sustainable going forward, which don't then need public sector intervention. A little example of that is our Bridgend Inclusive Network Group, which is where families of children with disabilities come together, that had support to establish and is now self-sustaining and running itself in terms of supporting from a peers perspective. So those are the sorts of things which I think work really, really well when they're owned and run by the people who they support and impact on. In terms of strategy, commissioning and service development, this is an area which Jackie is leading on us. There's lots of very exciting work in this area, actually remodelling and building on really, really exciting remodelling work that we've already progressed. A couple that I would highlight here in terms of the priorities. One is the outcome-focused domiciliary care. There's a report again, which I think is on the Scrutiny work programme for September around that, and we're looking to do some, I think, quite groundbreaking work there with our care and support providers. Supported living recommissioning, this is building on strengths that we already have, but very much being co-produced with people with learning disabilities in terms of that next phase. And the children's social care remodelling, which Laura and 2 colleagues from Children's Services and Commissioning did a presentation at the ADSS conference yesterday around, and there's a couple of slides from it next, which show all the different elements of how we're remodelling in a joined-up way with that aim of supporting children and young people to remain within Bridgend, within their own communities, to continue to access accommodation, care and support locally, and really I can't emphasise enough that this is leading edge work in a Welsh context, and lots of other authorities were very interested in the presentation that Laura, Steve and Jade gave yesterday. And really important with this, and emphasising what I said earlier about the voice of the person, is that the voice of the child has been absolutely central to everything that has been done and continues to be done. There are some very practical examples, from being involved in appointment processes to being involved in the internal decoration to actually, very strong engagement in that whole remodelling exercise. The next slide then is our strength-based practice. This has been a priority since prior to the Social Services and Wellbeing Act coming into force in 2016, and we're now 5 years in, and the job certainly isn't over in terms of supporting practice, change and improvement, and working in that strength-based way across both adults and children's services. What do we mean by that? It's a very systematic way of working and supporting very clear professional development for our social work staff, and at the core of it is understanding strengths, understanding risk, mitigating risks, and framing them in an accessible way, and giving our social workers really a bag of tools, which is the way that Laura describes it, that they can bring out and use to work with children, with families, with adults. It's part of an outcomes framework which cuts across both commissioning and the way that we practice. So it's about really strong conversations, relationships, which empower people and support people to empower very practical skill-based skills such as motivational interviewing. It's absolutely core to this for when you're working with people, to enable them to realise their own strengths and capabilities. And it's a very skill-based approach. So, the work of our social care workforce development team is absolutely critical to this in terms of skilling up workforce to work in this way. Which leads me on, I suppose, neatly to our workforce project, and there's a big overlap here between all of the different elements of the programme, which hopefully is coming across. In terms of the workforce programme, we've tried to be very clear, because we've got some significant areas of risk in this area, and so we've tried to just have a small number of priorities which we absolutely commit to deliver on. The first one there is social worker retention and recruitment in children's services, which is causing us some challenges at the moment. Care worker retention and recruitment across the whole care sector, which equally is causing us some challenges at the moment. And then underpinning both of those priorities is having really clear career pathways right from school through into college, into care, and giving people opportunities to progress all the way up into my job if they so desire. But certainly to get professionally qualified into social work if that is something which they are motivated to do, but also to grow the leaders in care of the future, the residential managers, the responsible individuals, etc. So just a little bit more here in terms of why children's social work retention and recruitment is such a priority. For us, it's basically because, in common with lots and lots of other authorities, we've got a real challenge in terms of retention and recruitment of social workers in our safeguarding teams and our new care experience children's team, particularly. And so we're not as competitive in terms of our social work jobs as compared to other parts of the market. There's no national pay and grading system for social workers. So, as one authority tries to resolve its issues, sometimes there can be issues that are knock-on in other authorities. And the ultimate solution for us is to be growing our own social workers. There was a very successful set of interview processes which Laura, Jackie and I are meeting with colleagues from HR and the social care workforce development team about after this meeting, where we've got lots and lots of people who are internal who are interested in being seconded onto the social work course, and we've got a real grow your own scheme for the medium term, because it will take 3 years for most of those people to be able to practice social work, but we've got some short-term issues that we need to resolve, which is why it's such a priority. Equally, such a priority is social care worker retention and recruitment. There's lots and lots of challenges at the moment, because we've got an increase in demand for social care post the second wave of COVID. I was going to say post-COVID, but we're still in a third wave, aren't we? Of course, but we're seeing increased need coming through to us, and we are not losing lots of people, but we've got people who are really tired, people very understandably wanting to take annual leave, and we are struggling to recruit both internally and into the whole sector. There's lots and lots of competition in the foundation economy at the moment, and our recommissioning piece, which we'll bring to you in September, aims to address that again within I suppose a medium-term time frame. But in the short term, we are very challenged, and any support from Scrutiny to address those challenges would be very welcome. And then the final sort of priority for us is our continued and building on our integration journey with Bridgend integrated locality. There's lots and lots of enthusiasm around this at the moment in terms of what further can we integrate in terms of teams at a locality level. We've benefited from Transformation Fund, but that's coming to an end this year. So there's a big piece to exit from that short-term funding and to look at how we use our core resources differently. But again, there will be more on this coming forward, I think, in future meetings. But really strong commitment to with the locality to reorganise most of our community services, including now mental health services, onto the cluster footprints, and then just being very mindful for most of the people that we work with. Clusters are an artificial construct, and it's subclusters or the neighbourhoods that people live in, which is important in terms of that resourceful and resilient communities priority. So that was the final substantive slide, and myself and colleagues very happy to take questions between us. If I can end the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. You certainly answered some of the questions that I had in your supplementary presentation. Can we go first of all? I know Councillor Gebbie had 3 questions in our pre-meet that I think would be great to bring in now.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation, Claire. It was really informative and full of really useful information. I do have some questions. And some of it you may not be able to answer, and I do appreciate that, and I appreciate there are other colleagues on the call that will be able to, particularly the cabinet member. I am sorry, Councillor Burnett, but I am going to put you on the spot. You made a commitment to pay the real living wage for all our carers. So how are you going to achieve that in commission services is one question that I have, please. And also, I like the person-centred approach. I'm a big fan of that, but I want to know what it's going to look like once we achieve it. What sort of targets are you going to be setting? So what is that going to look like once it's achieved? You did mention something, and Chair, I didn't raise this in the pre-meet, but because Claire has raised it, I will address some of it. I am well aware of the problems that we're having in relation to recruitment and retention around social care, social workers, etc. Part of that problem is the market supplements that are paid by various local authorities across Wales. That has been raised at Joint Council and NJC now. Because it's a massive problem. How can you say that a social worker is worth 40 odd K in one authority and we're only going to pay 30 if you're in another authority? It doesn't work. So that's something to be said for the NJC T's and C's. But I happen to sit on the NJC committee UK-wide. Net zero and carbon neutral is another, you said about a one council approach. I would like to know how you're going to achieve that in relation to social services, whether it's children's or adults. And I also appreciate that health needs to be involved in that, because if you are looking at hubs to deliver services in communities, health provision needs to be part of that. So how is health going to input into that? And I think that was it for me. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks very much. Can I jump on your question with regards to recruitment and add in there as well? Are we reliant on agencies as well? Because if we're not recruiting, and how much more are we paying for these agency staff? Because I know if I was going for a job and an agency, I could earn this much money, I wouldn't be looking at going to an local authority. So are we stuck there as well? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the questions, Councillor Gebbie and Councillor Williams. I don't know if Councillor Burnett wants to come in first on the real living wage question, and then I'll work through the others with colleagues.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Thank you. Yeah, we have made a commitment, and we've already had a report to Cabinet on how the real living wage is being preset as part of our commissioning process. So we've changed the way we're commissioning, and we have another report coming to Cabinet next week on how we've changed the process for respite care. So really we flipped it around, rather than going out and commissioning and there being a race to the bottom in terms of price and pay. We are setting the pay rate that we expect, and then the rest of the tender is being marked on quality. So the balance between cost and quality has completely flipped, and this the feedback from is that this will really make a difference. So this will be a difference of £1 or £2 per hour for workers, which over a month works out significantly, and it's going to go a long way to allowing us to retain staff within the care sector. Obviously, I had a meeting yesterday with the WLGA cabinet members for social services, and we had a meeting with Julie Morgan, the Deputy Minister for Social Care, and I asked for a timescale as to when funding for the introduction of the real living wage would come through, and she ensured that it would be prioritised, but it would be rolled in. And I know the leader, as the spokesperson for social services, has been, and we've all been championing. We really want BCBC to be a trial authority for this, because we are very committed to it, and we want to move forward on that and weave it into everything we do as much as possible, because it is building, it is helping to build our foundation economy as well. And from my perspective, we need to be rewarding those people that look after people, because and I've said it many times, if you look after money, if you look after buildings, if you look after antiques, you get financially rewarded. If you look after people, you don't. And the real living wage is not enough, but it's a start. And if we can keep people within the sector, those caring souls within that have a skill set that many of us don't possess, and are yet penalised for it, it's the start. We're doing as much as we can do, but again, that is a huge budget pressure, and we're under we have to make more cuts again this year, and that is a budget pressure that we really need to take forward.
Are you happy with that response to the first question, Councillor Gebbie?
I am. However, we just said about how we don't pay people enough that care for people. Does that not say something? And I appreciate this is a nationally negotiated pay scale. However, does that say something for the job evaluation process that we actually use within the council? Because we actually reward white collar workers, and we don't pay those who are the people that keep us running.
Chair, do you want me to move through now the next set of questions? Would that be helpful?
I have to say, I totally agree with Councillor Gebbie there. I've had a family member reliant on carers, and they don't get paid anywhere near enough in my eyes what they have to go through, and I think it needs to be resolved yesterday. Really, thanks. If you want to go on to the next lot.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I mean, as director, I've got a responsibility for workforce across the whole sector, and it's my most important responsibility, because unless we get the workforce right and support our workforce to be motivated, remunerated, valued, then all the other priorities can't be achieved, can they? Because we are a people service. So it's very assuring to have the support from Scrutiny around some of the things that we're trying to progress, and hopefully when we get into the September Scrutiny with the recommission of care and support at home paper, then you'll be able to get into some of that detail about the how we're trying to do that. In terms of the person-centred approaches, I'm sure other colleagues may wish to come in as well. For me, a lot of the targets and the measures of this are qualitative targets. So one of the things that we've been doing is to review our quality assurance framework and the way that we conduct case file audit, the way that we listen to the voices of people and their experiences of what we do. And as just a real basic, when those case file audits are taking place, if the voice of the person, of the child, the young person, the adult doesn't resonate, isn't very strong within the assessment, within the care plan, then that would be something which for me we would need to do some work around and to address. And it's one of the things which I think practitioners struggle with a little bit. Sometimes they work in that way, but they don't record in that way very well. And we've got a real priority around recording, and as part of our training programme, and a programme that Laura's looking to take place. In more numerative targets, you can see that person-centred approach reflected in terms of, you know, the number of people using different types of services, because generally people want to be as independent or interdependent as possible within their own community. So, you know, reduced reliance on care or day opportunities can be a sort of numerative indicator, but lots of the demonstration of that person-centred approach really is by listening to the voice, either through case files, through engagement and involvement, through looking at the lessons, through our complaints and compliments that come through. But I can see Laura wants to support as well and come in to answer that.
Yeah, I was just going to say something similar, really. I think what I would say is that we'll see those what matters conversations being recorded on citizens' records, really. So that's what social workers should be doing. They should be having conversations with people who receive our services and asking them what matters to them. And so, as Claire has indicated, that's what we would want to see in case file audit activity, and indeed sort of, you know, our annual feedback from people who've received services as well. We always ask people, do they feel they've been listened to? And I would hope that we'll be, you know, receiving positive responses to those questions. From a sort of children's perspective, what I would say as well is that if we use a person-centred approach and we build on people's strengths, then I think there's a greater likelihood of people accepting what issues are, focusing on their strengths, and then we'll be empowering them to overcome those difficulties as well. And I think in terms of quantitative measures, then hopefully we'll see less children in risky situations, so less children on our child protection register, and more children being safely cared for as well at home, living with their parents or extended family members. So the other quantitative target as well, or measure, would be having less care experienced children in Bridgend as well, because we've empowered families to overcome their difficulties and for people to come forward and help keep those children safe and live at home with either parents or extended family members. So I suppose that's another sort of, you know, indication of what measures we'd be looking for.
And Jackie may well want to add in from adults, but the other thing I should probably have mentioned is you know, regulators look at us in terms of this regard. So we, you know, that the older person's inspection was very strong in this respect, as was the recent domiciliary care inspection. And we've just had our quality assurance check from the last year from CIW, and they reflected on the adult side very great strength in terms of listening to what matters. But Jackie, I'm sure you want to add to that.
Okay, so probably using the same words, but actually it's this strength-based approach and outcome focus. We've been on a journey since we brought in the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and it's well established in parts of our service. For instance, our reablement type service, that's all about working with an individual, looking at their strengths, identifying goals, and then working towards that over a period of reablement. What we want to do now is expand that across the whole of the service, both with in-house and in our independent commission services. But it is about strength-based, isn't it? It is about what's important to that person, and it's what they want, how they want to achieve their outcomes. So it's taking that time, developing that relationship, working with them and empowering and supporting that person to achieve those outcomes so that they do become, you know, resilient, but also that their reliance is what it needs to be for that individual, really. So a lot of people come to us in social services, particularly in adults, in older people, when they've been through a period of potentially medical intervention or, you know, some sort of crisis in their life, and it's about working with them in developing that relationship for their long-term goals and meeting that, really. but Claire's absolutely right in that, we'll be looking at this by looking at what the person tells us about that, isn't it? And about how we're recording it, but also what they tell us by using case studies, by learning, by embedding that culture across the whole of our, our workforce. And workforce, I mean, within the council and in the independent sector. So.
Councillor Burnett, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, if you don't mind me coming back in on that, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that as a service, we really are streets ahead of other authorities on this, and I had evidence of that yesterday. There are other authorities that have not progressed as far in this process, and still with the cabinet, my equivalent in Powys was sharing a story of a complex case which was costing £42,000 a week out of county, which obviously has a huge impact on budgets. As a service, if you're familiar with the MTFS our progressive approach to the outcome-based model is allowing efficiencies to be made without any negative effects on the residents. So it is a win-win, but what is unfortunate is that we are not able to take those savings and reinvest them within the service to allow greater outcome-based efficiencies to be made and to improve the well-being of our population. We're having to offer them up as part of the cost-cutting process. So that, from my perspective, is really sad. So within the service, we are making savings, but we are not able to reinvest them going forward, because if we invest in prevention, then our front-end costs, our firefighting fund, will come down, but we're not able to do that at the moment due to the austerity position we still find ourselves in. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Gebbie, did you want to come back on any of these points?
Only the fact I'm well aware of the budget pressures on every local authority in Wales. I think until Westminster determines a different consequential and Barnet needs to be reviewed, then we're not going to get any further. So, I think that's another conversation for another day and not necessarily for this forum.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm going to go on to a question that we had from Councillor Phil White in the last meeting, which you touched on in your report. He'd raised about the remote working, so you have explained in your presentation that you're trying to get as many people back as possible because it's imperative with the jobs you do. Yesterday, the First Minister's announcement said that whilst he wanted his people to go back to work, there was no social distancing rules going to be used in work. He did want people to work from home if possible. Will that have any effect on the local authority and those going back to work? And I think I'll bring in again, I think it was you, Councillor Gebbie, on that same sort of topic, the home working allowance, if you want to come in with your question on that as well.
I raised my hand to have my net zero carbon neutral question answered as well. But yes, Blaenau Gwent have issued staff with a £26 per month home working allowance now. So I appreciate there's discussions going on, and I appreciate this is a more corporate level discussion because it affects more employees than just social services. However, we do need to consider the extra costs of people at home, particularly those that don't meet the tax threshold to even claim any tax relief on it. So there's all sorts of issues around that. But I think that was it. I'm sorry, Chair, losing it now.
No problem, thanks.
Yeah, Chair, do you want me to? I was conscious there were some questions from Councillor Gebbie that I hadn't answered. I'd written them down, but one of them was that net zero carbon neutral question and the contribution that we make from the Directorate to the council-wide priority, and that fits with the question, really, doesn't it, about home working? So if I pick up the home working first. As Councillor Gebby alluded to, this is, obviously there's a corporate piece here, and there is work which is owned at the CMB level to survey at the moment all group managers to look at what their business requirements are going forward in light of the Welsh Government requirement, and also a staff survey which is underway at the moment. And out of all of that will come the council's operating model going forward. And it's not to preempt that, but I would anticipate it may take us to some sort of continued blended approach. There's obviously people who all of their job is not in their own home, our care workers being key examples. There's other people at the other extreme who could be entire home workers, and then lots and lots of people in the middle. The reason that we highlighted our operating model is there's been an opportunity, whilst all that corporate work is working through, to bring business cases forward for specific groups of staff. And because of the nature of our social work team, some of those business cases have come through and been approved around the hubs. And that's very much a blended model. So it's not everybody in every day. Some of what we do within social work teams is more effective and efficient for people to be having that quiet space at home, writing reports. Other things is far more effective and efficient within the office environment because of that ready access to support. If you're chairing or participating in highly sensitive confidential meetings, doing that within your own home can be very challenging if you've got other family members, etc. there. So those business cases have been brought forward. I think that the carbon neutral, and I may well bring in Andrew here to talk a little bit about the wellbeing side of our directorate and the work that he's doing with partners in Halo and Arwen, particularly to contribute to priorities such as the heat network. But in terms of the way we work and work differently and reducing mileage, that whole cluster locality co-location based approach should be a contributory factor to our carbon neutral 2020. I think we're probably at relatively early stages. We're part of groups across the council looking at, with the facilities we run where we can plant trees, etc. But I think our understanding of where we need to be is still relatively early. But I did receive a letter, as other directors across ADSS did yesterday, from Welsh Government inviting us as ADSS to be part of a new health and social care carbon neutral 2030 group at Welsh Government level, and I actually put myself forward. I haven't received a response yet because it's such a priority within Bridgend. It's something that you became very interested very quickly in, isn't it, when you understand the importance of it. And so I have put myself forward, and hopefully will be successful in being the ADSS rep, and then I'll know lots of what's going on the national level around this agenda. So that was good. But Andrew, I didn't know if you wanted to add in a little bit more of the practical work you're involved in terms of heat network, etc.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic for you all, but that there's quite a range of focus within both the partnerships, or the larger partnerships we have with both Halo and Arwen, because energy costs, as well as are affecting the climate and planet, etc. So in terms of the Bridgend Life Centre, the intention, as we say, is that we'll have an integrated heat network that recycles energy that building creates, to support other assets within the vicinity, potentially including the civic offices. But within both of the partnerships, the focus on investing in things that are smart returns, things as LED lighting or pool blankets, or all of those things are built into annual contract management and contract planning. I think both these things sit off our books. So in terms of the council achieving its targets, it will be seen probably as a partnerships contribution and a consistency of approach, but also, I guess, plans to look at where we can co-locate opportunities and services and advice that reduces the number of assets needed in the future within these premises. All of that is important. What I would probably add also is through our community centres network, those that are council community assets. I think corporate landlord looking to invest in a range of smart investments across those venues as well, recognising, and I guess something that I know is particularly important to you, Councillor Gebby, supporting third sector organisations that are delivering on behalf or in partnership with the council to be as sustainable as possible also. So that there is probably quite a bit of work going on in this agenda, but always has been.
Great, thanks. Are you happy with that, Councillor Gebby?
There was only one partner agency that nobody mentioned. And I think it's really, really important when we're talking about community wellbeing and health and social care, because not once did you mention the NHS. I'm sorry, any of you. And I think it's highly important that our NHS should be providing services. Not everything is about a hospital. It's not all about going into hospitals. You talked about the community centres. Why aren't we having podiatrists there? Why aren't we having, little bits of surgeries or services that are more vulnerable, more people need to access? Why aren't they in, like, I'm a Pile ward member. Can you tell me where mine is? Because I don't know. And where does that mean we have to go for it? Because that's not net zero either. And I think that's part of that co-location stuff that we need to be talking about. And I appreciate that the NHS don't want to involve themselves, but they need to, because they have a duty and a responsibility as well.
Just to provide some update on that, Chair, I think there have been many discussions more recently of how we expand on those kinds of relationships. So pulmonary rehabilitation for a couple of years has taken place within our centres. There seems to be a drive to have more community-based things within communities. So a new joint care programme starting in our leisure venues, new cancer programmes starting in our leisure venues, and a big focus emerging that is still under discussion on prehabilitation, people that would have been ready for surgery pre-pandemic who have drifted into areas where they now need to improve their physical well-being to be ready for surgery. So yeah, it isn't all it could be, but I think the right discussions are taking place, and I think yeah, it's very astute of you, Councillor Gebby, to identify the importance of that relationship.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Are you happy now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew, as well, and Claire.
Right, okay. Can I bring in Councillor David White, because I'm conscious he sat in a car park and might have to leave early because he had a question he wanted to raise with regards to long COVID.
Yeah, as we all know, in regards to long COVID, we don't really know the outcome of it, the impact on our communities. But what we do know is it's in a lot more younger people as well. So therefore, I know I sit on a committee in regards to called Industrial Communities Alliance, and we did a paper on it last January on the impact in our communities, and a person by the name of Ian Sherwood, he's the officer on it. So it might be worth touching base with him as well, because he'll have access to the report. But it is very quite intense, and I think we should be looking at around the health implications, especially now it's in more and more younger people, job prospects, and the income and the impact on the budgets of the council. So has any work been done in relation to this?
Shall I come in, Councillor Williams?
Yes, please, thanks.
Yeah, we're certainly doing a lot of work around this from a social care perspective. Welsh Government published a rehabilitation framework, and they identified increasing need for rehabilitation services, and we're seeing both increasing need for rehabilitation services and for then long-term social care as a consequence of a number of factors, including people deconditioning because of the length of time they've been shielding, and delays in accessing NHS treatment. But clearly long COVID is one of those reasons why people are now needing more rehabilitation and needing more long-term social care as a consequence. So this is a big issue for us at the moment in terms of modelling for the future, and working with the NHS very closely to look at how we support people's rehabilitation, because hopefully for most younger people it's rehabilitation. We were incredibly badly hit by COVID as a county borough and as communities and our social care workforce. Lots of people became unwell with COVID, and so understanding the impact on our workforce as well is going to be important for us in terms of longer term illness and ability to work. So it really is a significant issue, and I'll certainly make those contacts with Ian if he's got some detailed analysis which will support our planning. But Jackie, you may want to add on long COVID as well, but in terms of that work and the impact that we're already seeing around social care.
Yes, thank you, Claire. Thank you, Chair. And I suppose, you know, in terms of what Claire's describing, really, we are very acutely aware, really, that in the last 6 months, that the level of complexity of individuals that are coming through our community-based services is of a higher need than pre-COVID. Some of it relates to the rehabilitation framework, but also those individuals with long COVID. You know, it is about working with our colleagues in the health board, and Andrew's just described some of the things that you know, the conversations that are being had already about people, you know, waiting for surgery, for instance, really. So it is about working with them around the recovery plan and looking at our population health, looking at gaps in that, and then working together to you know, to try and address some of the population health needs, really. So in our networks, we have been expanding our networks in terms of professionals, and that's a piece of work that we started pre-pandemic and continued throughout the pandemic. So, for instance, in our network teams now, we you know, previously we had district nurses, social workers, occupational therapists. We've now got CPNs, we've got other therapists that are working in those teams, accesses to physio for people that are coming into our services on a long-term basis, really. But it's about how do we support people to continue to live, and, you know, and what matters to them, really. So it is a journey that we've started, and I, you know, and I think we'll be doing this for a significant amount of time in our communities here in Bridgend. So thank you.
Yes, thank you both. Thank you very much.
Are you happy with that, Councillor White?
Yes, very happy. Like I said, I'll forward you the report this afternoon, Claire.
Great.
Thank you, Councillor White. Thank you.
Can I bring in Councillor Mike Clark now? You had a question on payments for care.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Can I first of all thank you for the presentation. As always, they help to deal with some of the obvious questions that will come forward. Interestingly, out of a very broad presentation, one of the things that I picked out was 3 words in terms of reducing handoff, and I feel that is something that often is underestimated. Someone being able to access a continuous service as opposed to going reinventing the wheel from one department to another. So I think that's a real hidden benefit that the new processes have developed, and thank you for that. My question is around adult care, and I suppose it's around finance in a way, and how the authority deals with a very sensitive issue. Mr. or Mrs. Jones is living on their own and they have emerging dementia. They're being quite rightly supported in their own home, but there comes a point where mental health services determine the person is no longer safe in their own home and needs to go into domiciliary care. I'm wondering how the authority deals with the sensitive issue of the person moving into domiciliary care, where the authority maybe starts paying for that care, how the issue is dealt with over the fact that there is a cap at the moment on, rightly or wrongly, whether we believe in it, there is a cap on public services, and I wonder how the sensitive issue is dealt with in terms of that individuals moving into care but having property and other resources that need to be taken into account in how the ongoing service is paid for.
Thanks very much. Can I jump on that with a further question on payments for care as well? When you're providing home care, how particularly through the last 12-18 months when we've got COVID, I'll give you an example that I had a family member who was on end of life care, and it was the NHS decision to say they're better off to stay at home, where the local authority funded the end of life care. They were sending in the carers, and so it was the local authority picking up the bill that would normally have gone through the NHS, because normally you would have gone into the hospital, but because of COVID, you wouldn't be able to say goodbye to your loved ones. What happens with those payments for the care there? Do we foot the bill, and have we seen a massive increase over the period with COVID, where we're providing care, more care for residents who have chosen to stay at home.
Claire, shall I start this one, if that's okay? So
Thanks, Jackie.
Okay, so charging for care has always been a really emotive subject area within adult services, and I remember when we brought in the fairer charging legislation, it had a significant exposure really in terms of what they're trying to achieve really. I suppose if I start from the point that charging is all about an individual, and it's an individual means tested process, and that and it would take into account, so if somebody was going into a care home, as you described, Councillor Clark, then there is very sort of set criteria in our legislation about what we can take into account, including people's property and other capital, you know, another savings, say for instance, as well as the weekly income that comes in, and that is set and laid down for us really within the council, and periodically changes, sometimes on an annual basis really, in terms of those thresholds really. So what would happen is an individual would have an individualized assessment, and then you know, the process would begin really. So it can range from somebody making, so somebody, you know, could have a package of care that costs in total £50 a week, or it could be £400 a week. But the cost that they would pay would still be an individual cost based on their income. So somebody potentially could have to contribute the whole amount, and then equally somebody would have to contribute nothing towards that care. So it is very varied in the whole system really. So in terms of, you know, our strategy within Bridgend for a very long time is about keeping people independent, keeping people at home, and our expansion of services that are based in the community has been based on bringing different professionals closer to people's homes so that they're enabled to stay at home. What comes with that then is that we've got less people going into 24-hour care settings, but if people are at home, then they are subject to our legislation around charging for those packages of care. But again, it is an individual means tested arrangement, and what we would do is our finance colleagues within the council, they would go out and do a financial assessment of that with that individual, but also they at that time then they would maximise their benefits as well. So so that there's two strands for that really. But I suppose what I'm saying is the more people that are kept at home, the more that as a council we support that in terms of our agenda going forward. But we are, at the moment we are experiencing a big increase in the level of packages that we're supporting, and the length and the size of those packages as a direct result of of COVID really. So so that is happening. So I'm hoping that I've managed to answer those questions.
I think if I may come back, Chair, I was thinking I absolutely understand and support the maintaining people in their own homes. I recall visiting a constituent locally who was 102 and said, "I don't need those people coming here and helping me dress," but she did. So I quite understand that. I'm thinking of the situation, particularly with dementia, where the medical services assess, if you like, and it becomes clearly obvious that the person cannot be left on their own because they'll go out and wander and not come back, or they tip hot water over themselves or something like that. Unfortunately, we do have people come into that position. So I was relating to that, but you mentioned that. I'm then thinking about the risk to the individual. What happens if the assessment is made in terms of the contribution, and either the individual, who probably is no longer regarded as being able to make their own decisions, but if you like, the family refuse to refuse to pay. I mean, is there a situation where the authority loses money, or again, it's a very sensitive issue. I do understand that, but I just wonder what happens if you get to a point where you're doing what you should do. Finance colleagues are doing what they should do, but family are not cooperating. And I do know on occasions that does happen.
I think that we do have occasions where that's happened, and we've had them for a number of years, really. So just to provide some reassurance, it's very clear in our mental capacity legislation that we have to adhere to here in Wales, really, around the decision making about a person entering a 24-hour care setting or receiving care at home. We have to go through a best interest process, and that best interest process would have a number of professionals in there. So it could be the consultant for the individual, but equally it would be the family members as well. So they would be part of that decision making process, really. In terms of finance, people will be assessed, as I've already said, and then our finance colleagues with the social workers within adult services then would seek to find some resolution with the family, really, around that. And we do have mechanisms through our legal processes, and thankfully that's very few and far between when we go down that route, really. So so we would always seek to find a resolution between us, really. So yeah.
Thank you, that's fine. Thank you, Jackie.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. That's all the questions apart from my own that we had in the pre-meeting. Has anyone else who wasn't at the pre-meeting got any questions, or have you got any questions after having the presentation? Councillor Watts, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just a general question, really. I mean, the name of the report is Improving Outcomes for the Joneses. What processes will be in place to check those outcomes and to see whether this new plan is in fact successful? I didn't see anything within the presentation which suggested that there might be a review in a year or two to see if everything's working, and I wondered what was in place. But that's not a criticism. It's a brilliant report, and I think it's extremely comprehensive, and of course we would all wish to see it work. So I wondered if Claire could answer that. What checks and balances are there that it's working, basically? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watts, for the question. And I think it's a really important question, because it's probably a missing part of the report and of the presentation, actually, to set out the so what. So everything sounds really good, doesn't it? But we do all of this, and how do we measure and understand impact? And there will be a number of ways that we will do that, and that we will report into councillors and members around that. So obviously we've got our performance framework, and we've got the performance measures that are reported through the CPA process, and those going in the right direction. Laura referred to earlier our measures around care experienced children, and seeing those numbers safely reduce is one of our key measures. The numbers of people that we are able to support to live more independently following reablement processes, those are some of our key measures on the adult side, which quarterly we advise through the CPA process how those are progressing. We also have some sort of big, I suppose over time, sort of evaluative pieces, and often we'll call on external evaluation. The Institute for Public Care have been doing some work with us across the region around the transformation ambitions that we had around integration and resilient communities, to look at the impact and to understand the impact of what those ambitions were, and to provide that independent academic evaluation. So that's an important part of how we're measuring over time as well. The third way that we're doing that, we've got our own within the Directorate Quality and Performance, quarterly quality and performance sort of meetings where we look at both the qualitative and what's coming through from complaints, compliments, case file audits, the quality assurance work, inspection work, as well as the numerative pieces around how well we're doing in terms of finance, workforce, and other measures that we look at with corporate business partners, so that we're keeping that regular track on everything. And then we triangulate all of that once a year, and it'll be coming to you, sorry, in September the 1st, I think, as a scrutiny committee before council in the annual report. So we'll keep sort of taking that sort of self-evaluative approach through that annual report as well. So those are the various mechanisms that we've got in place to measure impact. And necessarily there will be some things that changed 2 years ago when we were planning. We wouldn't have known about COVID, would we? And now, you know, some of those modelling and assumptions that we've seen have had to significantly change, and there'll be other things that at the moment, sitting here, we don't know are going to impact, but hopefully not as quite as devastating as COVID, but there will be things that will cause us challenges, and we'll need to adjust the programme, and we need evidence and data and be driven by that evidence and data in terms of being agile and adjusting the programme priorities as necessary.
Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, great, thanks. Can I just go back to the last question when we're looking at payments for care? In our pre-meeting, it was suggested that maybe we could have a briefing on care payments and capacity, and we'll put that onto our forward work programme. Would that be okay, just so we have a better understanding of the process and the systems in place? Great, thanks. Has anyone else got any other questions they wanted to raise? While I'm waiting for any hands to go up, if I could just ask a couple of questions. We're looking at, yesterday we had the announcement with regards to the double vaccine and the rules that you don't have to isolate if you're in contact with somebody who's had a positive COVID result. How will this impact the service? Because I know that the Welsh Government is suggesting that carers, for example, don't have to be double vaccinated in order to provide care. So I wondered if you had any comments on that. And the other question, I was looking at, you touched on return to services, and that we're opening up care homes now, and we're opening up the children's homes. How much capacity do we have, and are we having to run still at a smaller service? Because I understand that we've also got people in Ysbyty Seren at the moment, where they're coming out of hospital, and before they're going into a care home, there's a sort of holding place, but that's due to close at the end of the year. So are we content by then that we'll have the adequate spaces for anyone who will need to go into a care home? Thanks.
Thanks very much, Chair. There's a couple of questions there, aren't there? I think the first one, I guess, to say around the vaccination programme from a social care perspective. At the start of the vaccination programme, health and social care staff were the very highest priority, just below care home residents, and that was very, very welcome in terms of that advice from the JCVI, and we've seen really good uptake, far better, I think, than public health colleagues had anticipated in terms of the vaccine, and you know, that's great credit to our workforce who were first in line to have the vaccine, and continue to see that good uptake, and that having a real impact in terms of now very low levels of infection rates within care homes. We do from time to time get cases from staff, because people who are double vaccinated do sometimes still test positive, but we've got a very robust regime in terms of regular testing, LFD testing for care home staff, and testing for residents as well. So all of those, I suppose, are the safeguards that are in place in terms of people being safe to work within that care home sector. I think I probably need to read the detail of what's come out yesterday, which I've not done yet, to understand fully what's being said around periods of self-isolation, etc. But I know, because of the very difficult experiences that there were around care homes in the pandemic, that there will be that any decisions that will be made and advised on by Public Health Wales will have very strong risk mitigations in there. So the regular testing, continuous testing of staff alongside the vaccination programme, alongside whatever may be announced around booster vaccination programmes into the autumn, continued use of personal protective equipment within those settings. Those are all parts of the way that we operate now, which again is a significant change. But I think just in terms of responding to the detail of what's come out in the announcement around the self-isolation periods, just need to understand a little bit more of that, and we will work with colleagues in public protection, public health, the health board, and obviously care home providers themselves to make sure that we implement that in as safe a way as we possibly can. In terms of the care home sector, we do have some vacancies still within the care home sector. So our whole system has been under significant pressure in recent weeks, which we've talked about in terms of the demands on care at home, and there's been significant pressures within the hospitals as well. The part of the system which probably has got a little bit more capacity at the moment is the care home sector. There's still some support which is going into care homes for the first 2 financial quarters of this year around vacancies, because obviously very sadly they experienced reduction in occupants during the COVID crisis, which I know members are aware of. So we will be working with the sector to plan for the future, to look at how we have a sector which meets the needs that we know need to be met through care home provision. We're working with colleagues across the region to develop a market stability plan, so that those care homes that need to continue to operate are supported to operate if there are any short-term issues that need to be addressed. The Ysbyty Seren issue is related at the moment to the fact that my Steg Hospital is having significant work done to it, and so the inpatient beds at my Steg Hospital are not currently occupied, and those capital works will come to completion later in the year. So because initially Ysbyty Seren was opened up, wasn't it, as a step down for people who were recovering from COVID. That criteria for the hospital has now changed, and that bed capacity is now compensating for the fact that we haven't got the My Steg Hospital beds open. So I would anticipate that the health board would look to make the changes around Ysbyty Seren linked to the reopening of the My Steg Hospital inpatient beds, so that there's no gap there in terms of timing and bed capacity.
Great, thanks. I'm wondering if also if you've got capacity in the homes, it's because if there's the rules you can't visit your relatives in homes, you're more reluctant to send them at the moment to a home. You want to keep them at home where you can see them. But I think once rules relax, we might see an influx of people fed up then of looking after their relatives at home and pushing them all straight into the care homes. We might see a rapid increase in numbers all at once they relax visiting and the rules.
Yeah, I think that any decision any family with an individual ever makes for somebody to move into a care home is probably one of the most difficult decisions a family will ever be placed with. And the experience during COVID was really difficult, and there were large parts of time when homes were and had COVID cases within them where they couldn't accept new residents in. And as Jackie has said a little bit earlier, our long-term strategy over many years has been to support as many people as possible to stay at home with care and support in their own home. And so the work that we're doing at the moment around that market stability piece is to try and understand exactly what size that care home sector needs to be going forward. And we've also just agreed a contract for some expert support to help us to develop an accommodation care and support strategy for older people, which will look at the contribution of housing, our extra care scheme, sheltered schemes, other support in terms of accommodation at home to keep people at home, and that will help to give us the evidence and the data as well about how much and of what type of capacity we need in residential and nursing homes going forward.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Gebbie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it was just a very quick question, please, and it was about what are our delayed transfers of care looking like from hospital at the minute? And I'm also very conscious that when COVID hit, you didn't have an option about which care home you went into. Has that now been lifted?
Jackie, are you okay to come in on that question, please?
In terms of our, so the delayed transfers of care, that process was stood down at the very beginning of COVID, and it hasn't been resurrected in the same way as it was before. We still monitor on a weekly basis those individuals and that are in hospital that are looking to come out in the foreseeable future, really. In terms of our flow out of hospital into care home settings, that has started and is continuing, and we have very low numbers that are waiting in hospital for a placement because there's not a placement available. Yeah, because they, if they're there, it's because they're going through the, it could be a best interest assessment or working through with the family in terms of choice. So in terms of that, we do have people that are waiting in hospital where we've been unable to commission packages of care. So that's something that it is causing the service a challenge at the moment in terms of our ability to commission care for the reasons that we've already said, really, in terms of our capacity, really, in terms of domiciliary care. So, but the care home market is moving in the right direction, really, and there's no blockages from the care homes other than when they might have one positive case and they have to restrict admissions, but that is very few and far between at the moment.
Okay, thanks. You happy with that, Councillor Gebby?
Yes, in the main. Although, are they still, if they get offered a care home, is that where they have to go and they don't get any choices? Because it used to be they used to get a choice. And I appreciate the difficulties in commissioning care packages and res care and all that sort of thing. But do they get a choice? Because when COVID hit and we were doing the patient flow, they weren't given the option. If we found a home for them that would deliver the care that they required, they were gone. So is that still the same?
I suppose, that was the choice legislation got stood down, didn't it, in the whole process. In terms of what happened in Bridgend, I think it happened, if it did happen, it was very limited at the number of times that people, the choice policy was those homes that were open and were accepting, as opposed to an individual's choice about which homes, really. So I suppose the criteria is slightly changed, really. The choice policy is now actively being used within Bridgend. Yeah.
Great, thanks. I've just got a final question on well-being. I was part of the rota visiting team previously, and obviously I understand that safety and COVID, we couldn't continue with that. But what are we doing without members going into these care homes, children's homes and adult homes, to ensure that the residents are happy there and that there are no issues and that their well-being is being looked after as well? Thanks. I don't know if you want to answer, or Councillor Burnett's got her hand up as well.
I was going to say, does Councillor Burnett want to come in first, and then Laura, Jackie and I can
okay,
supplement as
great,
necessary.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just wanted to say that in my capacity, I have been able to go out and visit, and I have been able to. So I've been out to meet staff and children within residential care and supported living. So I know that's not as good as starting the rota visits, because that's a really vital part of the process is having, and it's really beneficial for us as elected members to take part in the rota process, and particularly as we're corporate parents. So those are starting back at some level. I mean, at the moment it's sort of me representing. I can absolutely assure you that I've got the same concerns as other members, and looking particularly at the well-being of children and people in care. So, but hopefully I'll pass over to Claire and she can let us know when we can restart the rota visits and what we're doing generally.
Great, thanks. I think Laura wants to come in as well.
Yeah, shall I talk a little bit about what's happened in the children's settings then? So obviously, as you've indicated, rota visits ceased last year, and but we do have other types of visits as well. So in each of our settings, all of the settings are run by a residential manager, but then there is a senior manager, one of my team, who's also responsible for the oversight of those services. And what I would say is that that group manager has continued to go to those services as and when required as well. So if there have been any emergent issues or concerns and things, then he has physically spent quite a bit of time in those services as required. And also as responsible individuals, myself and Jackie, we are required to undertake visits to every setting at least once every 3 months. And in the beginning, at the start of the pandemic, I know both Jackie and myself undertook those visits remotely. So they were more sort of responsible individual catch-ups, but we still had contact with people through Teams and did those routinely every 3 months. But over recent months now, we have started to go back into those settings as well. But like my group manager in children's settings, we know that we reported last autumn that there'd been some issues in one of our services, in particular in children's social care, and we would physically go into that service then because there was a reason to do so. But yes, as we've already indicated, you know, I've visited all of our services over the last month or so, and in fact, I was in one of them all yesterday afternoon as well. So that has resumed, and like you've indicated, it is very reassuring, and it's just, yeah, so important really, because it is really rich time that we spend with people who work in those services and the people who live in those services as well. But that is back up and running now and happening routinely.
Thanks very much.
Shall I just give you a bit of an update from adults, if that's okay? So as Laura's indicated, you know, the well-being of our residents was absolutely at the forefront of what we were doing from the very beginning. Within our own adult settings, you know, we set about in terms of the regulatory responsibilities, ensuring that we were managing and getting reassurance to senior managers really about the well-being of those residents really. So a number of ways we did that was through our normal contract monitoring, and that was done remotely in the beginning, but now that's being done in person. But equally, we were engaging with other professionals. So, for instance, district nurses still had to carry on visiting into the care homes. District nurses are part of our integrated teams, and they were in the homes as well. And we were picking up information, if you know, as we went through the whole of the last year and the pandemic, really. So I think, you know, that we had weekly, we had daily contact sometimes in terms of the situation really. So and there were lots of methods that we used in order to give ourselves reassurance about the well-being of individuals throughout that. And as I say, and now other professionals, you know, are allowed under the restrictions to visit the premises, and we're starting to do that with our senior managers within the directorates as well.
Okay, thanks very much. Did you want to add anything, Claire?
Yeah, just to say, you know, it has been very, very challenging, and when you're in a public health crisis, as we have been, lots of the things which really matter to us in terms of the way that we work and then matter to people have gone by, you know, were risk assessed as not being absolutely necessary in terms of protection of life and limb really. But as we've moved back through the tiers, we have been able to get back to more of the ways of work. And so something else which has resumed, which hopefully will provide some assurance, is around social work reviews and visits. And one of the things which caused us, I think, a lot of concerns was around deprivation of liberties, safeguards and best interest assessments. And those have started to be back physically taking place within care homes as well, which is really important, because I think there's one of the parts of our work which are really challenging to do virtually, in terms of understanding what's in the best interest of individuals. I think as we again now move through these tiers over the next little while, hopefully from 1 down to 0, we'll be working with members to look at how we would reinstate the member rota visits, because they're obviously really important on every level. So as we work through now into the autumn term, we'll look at that and see what's going to be possible with the detailed guidance that I'm sure will be there around care home settings within the new set of arrangements.
Great, thanks very much. Has anyone got any other questions before I inform the invitees they can leave and we can move on to the next agenda item? No. Okay, thanks very much for everyone for attending and answering all our questions on this. If you want to leave, we can then move on to our next agenda item, the forward work programme.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Right, okay, if we look at the forward work programme, is it Meryl or Tracy? Which one of you is going to take this?
I am, Chair, thank you.
Thanks.
So item 5, the forward work programme update, begins on page 25 of the agenda pack. Following on from members' consideration of the forward work programme for this committee at the previous meeting on the 17th of June, we've attached the work programme as Appendix A on page 31 of the pack. The subject overview and scrutiny committee work programmes will be included in the report to corporate overview and scrutiny committee with any updates from each meeting. The recommendations monitoring action sheet is attached as Appendix B on page 33 of the pack. This is to track the responses to the committee's recommendations at the previous meetings. A response has been circulated after this agenda pack was circulated to the 2 points not marked as actioned from the 17th of June meeting. And the outstanding responses from the Health Board were discussed at the Officer Planning meeting with the Corporate Director of Social Services and Wellbeing and have been chased by herself and by Scrutiny. The recommendations are set out in paragraph 9 on pages 29 and 30. I'll hand over to you, Chair.
Thanks very much. With regards to the responses we haven't received from the Health Board, I think we agreed in the pre-meet and in my meeting with you yesterday that we'd write to the Health Board, the Chief Exec and the Chairman to chase those responses. So if everyone's happy with that, it will move forward with that. And also out of this last agenda item, we looked at adding the a briefing on care payments and capacity on there, so if we could add that somewhere into the forward work programme. But does anyone else have any comments on it, or is there anything missing that they think needs to be added? Silence. I think in the pre-meeting everyone was happy with the contents of it. If that's the case, then are we happy, Meryl, to just add that 1 point and then we'll write to the Health Board?
Yes, Chair, I'll take those points forward.
Yeah. Great. Okay, that's nice and quick. If we move on to agenda item 6 then, urgent items, and there are no urgent items. So that means this meeting has come to a close. So thanks very much, everyone.